You think you've seen rich. You haven't seen this. Rick Ross just opened the gates of a 300-acre fortress in Georgia, lined up what insiders are now calling the most outrageous private car fleet ever assembled by a rapper, and quietly dropped a number that doesn't match a single thing Google has ever told you about Rick Ross. And the part nobody is brave enough to say out loud is this. Every single estimate floating around the internet about Rick Ross is wrong. Not slightly wrong. Embarrassingly wrong. Rick Ross said it on camera, with a laugh that wasn't really a laugh, and the room went quiet for half a second too long. That half second is the whole story. Buckle in, because what's about to be laid out here is a forensic walk to the empire of Rick Ross. The cars, the cribs, the jets, the feud, the receipts, the rumors, and the one detail every other channel skipped right past without even blinking. Here's the move nobody else is making. Forget the surface level, look how rich Rick Ross is angle. That story has been told 1,000 times. The real story, the one the algorithm has been burying, is the connect-the-dots map between 4 cribs in one single Florida town, 200 cars spread across multiple states, a 300-acre compound the size of a small municipality, a private jet with a name painted on the side, and a net worth figure that Rick Ross publicly mocked into the trash on the same weekend a long-buried rival decided to crawl back out of the comment section. None of these things are accidents. Every brick in the Rick Ross empire was placed on purpose. And once these dots get connected, the picture that shows up isn't a rapper. It's a one-man economic zone with a beard. Start with the car show, because that's where Rick Ross opened the gates and let the world walk to the front door of the fantasy. The 2026 Rick Ross car and bike show, the 5th one of these now, wasn't a meet. It wasn't a flex. It was a coronation. Custom builds, classics restored to surgical perfection, motorcycles the size of small couches, a Big Meats bike that walked away with Bike of the Year, and turned half the timeline into Big Meats believers all over again. People didn't just show up. People drove in from other states, set up tripods, ran B-roll, made TikToks, lined up just to stand near the cars they couldn't afford to look at in showrooms. And the entire backdrop was the promised land. 300 acres, 60,000 square feet of house, a mansion that, when described out loud, sounds less like a residence and more like a small private school campus that happened to grow a chandelier. Now pause here, because this is the moment the official narrative starts cracking. When Rick Ross was asked a question every interviewer eventually has to ask, the Google net worth question, the $150 million question, Rick Ross laughed. Not a polite laugh. You sweet summer child laugh. And the response was so casual, it almost slipped past everybody watching. Rick Ross said the number had never been accurate. Never. Not once since the beginning. And when pushed, when the interviewer asked if the number had ever been too low, Rick Ross didn't blink. Never lower. That word lands different the second time you hear it. Never lower. Meaning every single number the public has ever seen attached to Rick Ross has been below the truth. For years. For more than a decade. And nobody in mainstream media is recalculating. Nobody is rewriting the headlines. Nobody is updating the Wikipedia page. So that's exactly what's about to happen here, line by line, asset by asset, receipt by receipt, in real time, with zero filter and zero respect for the lazy estimates that have been recycled by every entertainment desk on the planet. Take the cribs. Rick Ross owns 4 homes in Davie, Florida. 4 in one single town. Not 4 houses across 4 states. 4 houses across 4 streets, basically. 2 more spots in Miami. Cribs in Georgia. The Atlanta compound. Property in places that haven't even hit the gossip blogs yet. Rick Ross explained the geography with a shrug, like it was obvious. When you got 200 cars, you can't keep them in one zip code. You have to spread the fleet across state lines. That sentence alone should have made the financial press lose its mind. Because that's not a car collection. That's a logistics operation. That's a distribution network. Rick Ross is running cars the same way Amazon runs warehouses. And somehow nobody has put that comparison into print until right now, in this video, on this channel, on the record. And the cars themselves, listen carefully, are not the kind of cars that depreciate. Rick Ross is not out here stacking brand new German sedans that lose 40% of their value the second the tires touch the driveway. Rick Ross is buying classic American iron, Chevelles, Impalas, Cadillacs from eras when Cadillac actually meant something, Mustangs, Donks, custom builds that have been worked on by hand for years, where the labor alone outvalues the original sticker price by a factor of 10. Mix in the Rolls-Royces, the Bentleys, the Lamborghinis, the white 745 Beamer from the early hustling days that Rick Ross keeps as a museum piece. And what shows up is not a garage. It's a vault. Every single one of those vehicles is appreciating. Every single one of them is becoming more valuable every year. In a country where you can no longer buy a new 1972 Chevelle, no matter how much money is on the table. This is the part Rick Ross has been quietly explaining for years, and absolutely nobody picked up on the lesson. Rick Ross said it plain on camera. Real estate is the asset. You can build a new car. You cannot build a new corner. You have to buy that corner. That's not a rap bar. That's an investment thesis. That's the kind of sentence that gets framed inside hedge fund offices. And the people who only listen to Rick Ross with the punchlines completely miss the masterclass that was happening between the punchlines. Now zoom out and stack the assets in one pile, and look at the total. For homes in Davie, 2 in Miami, the promised land in Georgia at 300 acres and 60,000 square feet, which Rick Ross casually described as bigger than 3 housing projects stacked together plus a few football fields. A private aircraft with the Rick Ross name written on the side of it. And yes, Rick Ross took a quiet moment on camera to point out that there's a difference between an airplane and a jet, and that the one Rick Ross owns is the kind of difference that matters. Approximately 200 vehicles, the majority of which are appreciating assets. Music catalog, Wingstop franchises that Rick Ross has been quietly stacking for years. Checkers franchises, Belaire champagne deals, investment positions in companies the public hasn't even been told about yet. Add that up honestly, with conservative accounting, and the $150 million Google number starts to look like a typo somebody forgot to correct in 2018. Here's where the unique angle sharpens. Every other Rick Ross video on the internet is asking the same lazy question. How rich is Rick Ross? Wrong question. Wrong frame. The actual question is this. What does it mean when a rapper from Carroll City, Florida, quietly accumulates so much American real estate, so much vintage American steel, so many franchise locations of American fast food chains, that Rick Ross effectively becomes a small American economy operating under one Rick Ross-shaped umbrella? That's the angle. Rick Ross isn't a celebrity with money. Rick Ross is an asset class. And right on cue, just as the car show footage hit 1,000 timelines, the oldest beef in modern hip-hop decided to wake up from its nap. 50 Cent, the other Curtis, the man who spent more than a decade now using Rick Ross as a punchline, and who watched the car show clips spread across the timeline, and apparently could not resist the urge to type. The lawn became the joke. Why is Rick Ross cutting grass? Why is Rick Ross saving money on landscaping? Standard 50 Cent material. Same playbook, same drum, and the comments, predictably, lit up like a Christmas tree. But here's the part everybody is missing, and this is the layer underneath the layer. 50 Cent's whole thesis for years has been that Rick Ross is broke, fake, leveraged, performing wealth that doesn't actually exist on a balance sheet. The car show, with thousands of fans walking the grounds, with first-place trophies handed out to Big Meech, with footage streaming live across every platform, was effectively Rick Ross's response without needing to say a word. The grass joke wasn't a kill shot. The grass joke was the sound somebody makes when there's nothing left to say. Rick Ross didn't reply with a diss track. Rick Ross replied with 300 acres. And the response Rick Ross did give, when Rick Ross finally addressed it, was surgical. Rick Ross extended an invitation. Bring the Versace Lamborghini to the car show. Bring the homies. Pull up to the promised land. That wasn't anger. That was confidence. That was a man who has built so much that the worst possible scenario for the rival is to actually show up and see what's there. Because the second the rival sees in person, the joke dies forever. Rick Ross knows this. Rick Ross has always known this. And every single car at that show was, in a sense, an exhibit in the case Rick Ross has been building for 15 years. Now circle back to the cars one more time, because there's a detail buried in the footage that almost nobody has commented on. Rick Ross has a personal golf cart. Just a golf cart. And Rick Ross took the time, the actual time, to have Louis Vuitton monogramming applied to a golf cart. A golf cart. Think about what that means. Most people consider a golf cart a glorified yard tool. Rick Ross treats a golf cart like a runway accessory. That single decision tells you everything about the way Rick Ross approaches branding. Every surface is a billboard. Every object is a statement. Every detail, no matter how small, is part of the empire. The white 745 from the hustling days. The dope boy era Beamer. Kept, preserved, polished, displayed. Because the past is a marketing asset, and Rick Ross does not throw away marketing assets. And then there's the promised land itself, which deserves an entire chapter. Rick Ross described it the cleanest way possible. When the real estate agent opened the door, Rick Ross walked in and said, "This my house." Past tense. Already decided. The agent could only blink. That moment, that single sentence, "This my house," is the entire philosophy of Rick Ross compressed into 3 words. Rick Ross does not negotiate against the dream. Rick Ross walks in and declares the dream. The agent's only job at that point is paperwork. The agent doesn't sell Rick Ross anything. Rick Ross has already bought it in spirit before the contract gets printed. That is a level of self-direction most people will never operate at, and Rick Ross does it on a Tuesday afternoon in a polo shirt between cigar puffs. 300 acres, 60,000 square feet, a property so large it has its own internal geography. Rick Ross described it as bigger than 3 housing projects stacked together, plus football fields. A town, not an exaggeration, a literal town, with its own pond, its own roads, its own stables, its own garages housing those cars, its own peacocks roaming the grounds because, yes, Rick Ross is peacocks, and yes, Rick Ross has casually mentioned them like everybody owns a few peacocks. The flex isn't the peacocks. The flex is that Rick Ross forgets to mention the peacocks. That's the level of casual we're talking about. So, where is all this money coming from? Because every Monday morning, Rick Ross gets on social media and asks the exact question the audience is supposed to be asking themselves. What new money are we talking about today? What new brands? What new businesses? Reward your loyal partners. Get on Facebook and post the new stuff. That's not motivation. That's a mission briefing. Rick Ross has been running an unofficial Monday morning leadership clinic for years, and the audience has been treating it like content. It isn't content. It's instruction. And the people who treated it like instruction are doing better in life than the people who treated it like a meme. The income streams mapped out clean. Music catalog royalties that never sleep. Touring revenue. Wingstop franchise ownership across multiple locations. Checkers franchises. Bel-Air deals. Real estate appreciation across multiple Florida towns and Georgia. The car collection as appreciating assets. Branded merchandise. Book deals. The Promised Land itself as a venue for paid events, music videos, photo shoots, and content creation. The car show as an annual revenue and brand engine. The private aircraft as both lifestyle and potential charter logistic. Every channel feeds another channel. Every asset cross-references another asset. It's a closed system, a loop, an ecosystem. And every time Rick Ross posts a new car, every time Rick Ross opens a new gate, every time Rick Ross stands on the porch of the Promised Land and grins into a camera, the loop spins one more time, and another wave of revenue gets generated somewhere down the line. Now compare that, honestly, to almost any other artist of the same generation. Most artists have one revenue stream, the music. When the music slows down, the lifestyle slows down. Rick Ross built the lifestyle to survive the music. Rick Ross built a lifestyle to survive Rick Ross. That's the difference. That's why even the most aggressive jab from a rival cannot land properly. The body Rick Ross is wearing is too well armored. There is no soft spot. The cars are there. The cribs are there. The franchises are there. The Promised Land is there. The jet is there. The catalog is there. Pick a target. There isn't one. And the car show, circle all the way back, because this is where the story closes, was a public demonstration of all of it in one place at one time. Big Meech, fresh out a 19-year federal sentence, building bikes legitimately, taking Home Bike of the Year on Rick Ross's lawn. Carlos Miller, the comedian, openly admitting that the favorite bike at the entire show belonged to Big Meech. The vibe wasn't celebrity. The vibe was legacy. The vibe was the building of a small American institution in real time. And the visitors who walked the grounds, who stood next to Chevelles and the Impalas and the Customs and the supercars, weren't there to take selfies with cars. They were there to stand inside a story Rick Ross has been writing for 20 years. 20 years. Port of Miami dropped 20 years ago. The Fox Theater concert celebrating that anniversary happened the same weekend as the car show. That was not a coincidence. That was choreography. The entire weekend was choreographed. Concert on one night, car show on the next. FIFA events spilling across Atlanta in the background. Cameras everywhere. Content everywhere. Rick Ross at the center of all of it, in shades, with cigar, smiling at a property the size of 3 projects, while another rival typed jokes about lawn care from a different state. Rick Ross did not need to respond to the jokes. The weekend was a response. The weekend was the entire response. So when somebody asks, somewhere out there in the comment section, somewhere on a podcast, somewhere on a Reddit thread, how much is Rick Ross really worth? The honest answer is this. More than Google says. More than Forbes prints. More than the rivals want to admit. More than even the most generous estimate has ever floated. Because the number is not a number. The number is a system. The number is 4 cribs in Davie, 2 in Miami, 300 acres in Georgia, 200 cars in motion across state lines, multiple franchise operations, a private aircraft, a music catalog that never stops earning, a brand that prints attention like a mint prints currency, and a Monday morning audience that treats every post like a stock tip. Add all that together honestly, and the answer isn't a dollar figure. The answer is a small kingdom. And that is exactly why the car show mattered. That is exactly why the weekend mattered. That is exactly why the jokes from across the timeline didn't land. Because Rick Ross has been quietly assembling a kingdom while everybody else was watching the music video. The music video was the distraction. The kingdom was the actual project. And anybody paying attention to the right details, the 4 Davy houses, the Louis Vuitton golf cart, the appreciating Chevelles, the white 745 from the hustling days kept like a relic, the promised land described as bigger than 3 projects, the casual mention of Peacocks, the Monday morning mission briefings. Anybody paying attention to those details has been reading the blueprint in plain sight for years, in plain English, in plain daylight, and almost nobody bothered to write the blueprint down until right now, in this exact video, on this exact channel, on this exact afternoon. The forgotten detail in all of this, the one nobody else circled, and this is the angle this entire video was built around, is that Rick Ross essentially confirmed on camera that the public number is fake. Not a little fake. A lot fake. And never in the direction the public would assume. Always in the direction of underestimation. That is the line that should have been the headline of every entertainment site that weekend. That is the line that should have been screenshotted and turned into 1,000 tweets. And almost nobody ran with it. Almost everybody chased the cars. Almost everybody chased the rivals' jokes. Almost everybody chased the big Meech bike. Almost nobody chased a line that actually rewrote the entire financial frame of Rick Ross in one sentence. So now you have it. Now you know. Now it has been said out loud, in this video, on the record. Rick Ross is worth more than the internet has ever been willing to admit. And Rick Ross said it first with a laugh, and the room went quiet for half a second too long. That half second is the whole story. That half second is the empire. That half second is the answer. Now, this is where the audience comes in. Drop a comment with the vehicle from the show that hit you the hardest. Drop a comment on whether Rick Ross has the greatest celebrity car collection alive right now. Drop a comment on the rivalry, the promised land, the 200 cars across multiple states, the Monday morning mission briefings, any piece of the story that lit a fire under the brain. The conversation is built in the comments. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. Share the link with one person who still thinks the Google number is real. And come back, because the next deep dive is already loading on a fortune the headlines keep getting wrong. Until then, keep the same energy Rick Ross keeps on Monday mornings. Keep building, keep moving, keep stacking, because somebody somewhere is quietly assembling a kingdom right now, and the only difference between that somebody and Rick Ross is 15 years of refusing to stop. See you in the next one. One last thing before the credits roll on the Rick Ross empire. Every detail mentioned above can be cross-checked. Every asset can be verified, every clip can be rewatched, and every receipt holds up under daylight, and that is the only reason any of this matters at all. One last thing before the credits roll on the Rick Ross empire. Every detail mentioned above can be cross-checked, every asset can be verified, every clip can be rewatched, and every receipt holds up under daylight, and that is the only reason any of this matters at all. One last thing before the credits roll.